Hello, my name is Yeli, and for this assignment, I chose the topic of eyewitness testimony. For this assignment, we're going to be talking about what eyewitness testimony is, the problems behind eyewitness testimony, and the human brain, the process behind it. I'm going to also talk about eyewitness misidentification and wrongful convictions, and what has to change in order for this eyewitness procedures and the eyewitness testimony to change. So let's get right to it. Let's get started with what is eyewitness testimony. So eyewitness testimony is what happens when a person witnesses a crime or an incident or another legal important event. This person may later get up on the stand and recall for the court all the details of what they witnessed. It includes what happens during the actual crime as well as everything that happens from the time of the event when it's over to when later in the courtroom when they have to testify. The eyewitnesses may be interviewed by the police and numerous lawyers to describe the suspect, the perpetrator, or anybody involved. As we all know, like in TV shows and true crime TV shows, people and eyewitnesses, when they witness a crime or an accident, they are put under a lot of pressure in order to testify to see who the person who committed the crime was. So that is what eyewitness testimony is. Next, we're going to talk about the problems with eyewitness testimony and the human brain. So why do eyewitnesses sometimes get it wrong? This can happen for several reasons. Eyewitnesses are not perfect. They're human beings. We can all be subject to being an eyewitness for an event or a crime, and we just never know when it might happen. So let's get to the human brain and how it works. The human brain only encodes bits and pieces of the scene at the time. We have a partial store of what we see, and the brain fills in the gaps with its own information. This information can be outside sources from the event occurred, rejustice, or experiences from the past. So when someone encounters an event, they're not getting prepared mentally for this to happen. So when they have to recall the events, they can lose pieces. We can all forget what happens. We can forget what we just did yesterday. So it's really hard for the human brain to know everything. Our brain doesn't work like a video recorder. So we don't get the full playback of what just happened. High stress environment. So when someone witnesses a crime, that can be very stressful. It will require them to think a lot, to remember pieces or identify certain things of the person. Witnesses are subject to high stress or anxiety. Any traumatic situation such as an assault, a murder, rape, or a robbery will make it much harder for a witness to identify the perpetrator. Our memory is reconstructive. Our memory takes in bits and pieces of the information and processes the important aspects. The accuracy of our memory is not measured of how vivid or certain you are that they occurred. So even if we think, and we might be really, really sure that we saw what we saw, or you think this person was wearing a certain color, our mind literally plays tricks with us, and we might think that we see something when it's not there. So here, this picture, it's just to explain that our brain and our memory does not work like a videotape. It works more like a puzzle. It works more like a puzzle because we recreate in our mind each memory, and each memory can become fragile every time we're doing this. So every time we're remembering something, our brain is missing and it's diminishing of the memory that happened. So our memory is reconstruction. Our memory is not played like a videotape, and it can't be played again. Focus of the weapon. Witnesses commonly testify as to their focus on the perpetrator's weapon, not necessarily the identity of the perpetrator. So the witnesses, when they encounter a crime or an event, they focus on what the weapon was. If it was a gun, if it was a knife, if it was a blunt object, they focus on that object specifically because that was the object that was causing harm, or that was the object that the person was threatening people with. A witness can recount the exact color, size, and shape of a gun or a knife pulled on them. When a weapon is involved in a crime, it can have a major influence on the accuracy or the reliability of the account given by an eyewitness. So just imagine being at gunpoint. You're focusing on that person not shooting you. You're not focusing on that person has short hair, long hair, if he's wearing green or black. I mean, you can focus on those specific things, but most importantly, your focus is going to be on that weapon that's in your face. We're going to talk about mistaken identifications are the leading factor in wrongful conviction. So mistaken eyewitness identifications contributed to approximately 70% of the 363 wrongful convictions in the United States overturned by post-conviction DNA evidence. Of those false identifications, 41% involved cross-racial misidentification, and 28% of the cases involved a false conviction. So DNA, with technology and science evolving, DNA has released a lot of people behind bars that were identified just because an eyewitness saw them, or just because someone saw them there or can remember them. DNA is taking people out of jail because, like we were just talking, the human brain makes mistakes, and it's not like an eyewitness purposely makes the mistake. It's your mind. You can't play back everything and every detail of what occurred. So wrongful conviction is a really big thing with eyewitness testimony. And in the next slide, we're going to talk about how mistaken eyewitness identifications can be fixed, and how agencies and investigators should change their ways. So changing eyewitness procedures. How to improve the accuracy of eyewitness identification. So for wrongful convictions, we can lower these statistics, and we can lower these numbers. First, lineups should be double-blinded by administrators. So a double-blinded lineup is where neither the administrator nor the eyewitness know what the identity of the suspect is. This is important because this is going to allow biases to not be there. It's gonna allow the witnesses to solely concentrate on what they saw and not any other biased opinions or biased thoughts of anyone else. So double-blinded administrations are going to definitely be a big difference on these eyewitness testimonies. Train law enforcement. So training on vision, memory, and variables that affect the memory. Training with vision and memory and variables that affect them is important. Law officers have to know that a lot of things affect the memory, like we were talking, and practices for minimizing contamination of the memory. So officers should be trained in their memory and how witnesses are, obviously, if someone's been to a traumatic event, they're not going to be able to remember everything right then and there. Document confidence. Officials should document initial confidence on identifying suspect, not months later. So when they encounter this witness that might have seen what happened or who did it or what happened, make sure to document. The sooner the better. Document their confidence initially. If you ask a witness what they saw months later, like we talked, their memory is going to be diminished. They're going to be losing bits and pieces of what happened. And changing instructions. Change statements done by administrators, like the suspect may or may not be present in the lineup. A lot of eyewitnesses feel pressured. They're already going through the stress, anxiety, knowing they have to testify in court. A lot of lineups, some of the suspects aren't even on the lineups, and these eyewitnesses they're kind of pressured into choosing someone. So changing the way that the instructions are given is going to be huge. For example, the suspect may or may not be present in the lineup, meaning if the person is not 100% certain that the individual is on the lineup, then they can say that they're not going to feel pressured to have to pick someone just because the officer is there. Alrighty, well, that was my presentation on eyewitness testimony and what it was, the problems behind eyewitness testimony, and the way our brains work with recollecting memories, and how our brain is reconstructive. Our brain does not work like a videotape. It works more like a puzzle, and we put bits and pieces together. We talked about eyewitness misidentification and the problem it leads to with wrongful convictions, and changing eyewitness procedures, changing the way the procedures for lineups are made, or the way the eyewitness testimonies are interrogated will be huge. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you.